the night the roof gave in. It wasn't just the house that broke. Rain slammed against the windows like it had a grudge, and thunder rolled over the Oregon mountains, low and endless. Inside, Nora Blake pressed her back against the kitchen counter, whispering to her son, "It's okay, baby. Just a little storm." Jamie was 7, brave in theory, terrified in practice. He clutched his stuffed bear tight, eyes wide every time lightning flashed through the old farmhouse. The roof groaned above them. They'd moved here only 2 weeks ago, Nora and Jamie, trying to start over after the divorce and the court battles that left her broke but free. The house was cheap, too cheap, but it had a porch and a view of the forest. It was supposed to be a beginning. Now it felt like the end. A sharp crack split the air, wood splintering, glass shattering. The ceiling buckled. Rain poured through a sudden hole, drenching everything in seconds. "Mum," Jamie screamed, "get your jacket, now." Nora grabbed the flashlight, hand shaking. "Go to the truck, go." The front door jammed. She shoved her shoulder against it once, twice, then it burst open. Wind screaming in like an animal. Jamie ran toward the old pickup parked under the tree line, but his small legs slipped on the wet steps. "Jamie." She reached him just as another crack split the air. A piece of roof timber came loose. She didn't have time to think. She threw herself over him, then a pair of strong arms caught the falling beam before it hit. Nora looked up, heart pounding. A man stood over them, tall, soaked, eyes dark with focus. He pushed the beam aside like it weighed nothing and shouted over the rain, "Get inside the truck." She hesitated. Who now? There was something in his voice, not anger, not panic, just command. The kind that made you trust him before you knew why. He guided them to the truck, slammed the door, and ran back toward the collapsing porch. Nora grabbed Jamie's hand, shaking. "Stay here." She jumped out again. "What are you doing?" "Turning off the power." He yelled back, "You've got live wires under that roof." She wanted to argue, but then lightning flashed, and for a moment she saw his face clearly. He looked like someone who'd seen worse storms than this. By the time the fire truck arrived, the man had shut the power, moved her tools, and helped patch a tarp across what was left of the roof. When the chaos settled, Nora wrapped a blanket around Jamie and turned to him. "Thank you," she said, breathless. "I don't even know your name." "Ethan," he said simply. His voice was low, steady. "Ethan Cole. I live up the road." She blinked. "I didn't know anyone moved into the old Miller place." 2 weeks ago, he said. "Guess we're both new." Nora looked at him, the soaked shirt clinging to a body that had clearly seen hard work. The quiet eyes that didn't ask for credit. "Thank you," she repeated softly. He nodded once. "You should get your kid warm. I'll check the roof tomorrow." "You don't have to." "Yeah, I do," he said. Then he turned and disappeared into the rain that night. When the storm finally faded, Nora sat by Jamie's bed, watching him sleep. Outside, the tarp flapped in the wind, and through the window she could see the faint porch light of the house up the road. A stranger had saved them, and somehow, she knew this wasn't the last time he'd walk through her door. The storm had left the world heavy and quiet. When Nora stepped outside the next morning, the air smelled of wet cedar and mud. The sky was still grey, but calm, that uneasy kind of calm that made you wonder what else could break. Her house looked worse in daylight. Shingles scattered across the lawn, half the porch railing gone. The roof tarped unevenly, like a wound covered too fast. She stood on the steps, arms crossed over the blanket she hadn't realized she was still wearing, and whispered to herself, "Welcome home." "Nora." Jamie appeared behind her, rubbing his eyes. "Is it broken?" he asked. "Just a little," she said, forcing a smile. "We'll fix it." "How?" "I'll figure it out." But even as she said it, her throat tightened. The truth was, she didn't know. The insurance hadn't kicked in yet. Her savings were gone. And the contractor she called last week had ghosted her after realizing how small the job was. For a single mum trying to rebuild from scratch, even a roof felt impossible. A sound caught her attention. Boots crunching on gravel. She turned. Ethan was walking up the path. Toolbox in one hand, thermos in the other. Hair still damp from a shower. He stopped at the edge of the porch, nodding politely. "Morning, morning," she replied, surprised. "You didn't have to," I said. "I said I'd check the roof. You meant it." "Usually do," he said simply. He set the toolbox down and scanned the damage, movements precise and quiet, like he was used to fixing things that other people gave up on. Jamie peeked out from behind Nora. "Are you gonna fix our house?" he asked shyly. Ethan smiled slightly. "If your mum lets me." Nora frowned. "I can't pay you." "Not now." "Didn't ask for money." "Then why?" He looked up from the broken shingles, meeting her eyes. "Because it needs fixing," he said. "And because you look like you've had enough storms." For a moment, she couldn't speak. Something about his tone, calm, matter-of-fact, carried more comfort than any empty sympathy ever had. He climbed the ladder with ease, testing beams, hammering loose nails, moving like someone who knew with the way others knew words. Nora made coffee and brought it out to the porch, trying not to stare but failing miserably. Every swing of the hammer felt deliberate, disciplined, not just muscle, but memory. He wasn't just patching a roof. He was reclaiming control by noon. He climbed down, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You'll need a full replacement," he said, "but the patch will hold through next week's rain." She nodded, looking up at the roof. "Thank you, really." Ethan picked up his tools. "I've got some spare shingles. I'll bring them by later." She hesitated. "Why do I feel like you're doing this for someone else?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "Maybe I am." And then he walked back down the road, leaving her with more questions than answers. That evening, Jamie sat at the kitchen table, drawing something. "What are you working on?" Nora asked. He grinned, showing her a sketch of their house roof patched, porch lights glowing, and a stick-figure man standing beside them. "That's Mr. Ethan," he said proudly. "He fixed it." Nora smiled, tracing the lines with her fingers. "Yeah," she murmured. "Maybe he did." But what she didn't say, what she couldn't admit yet, was that for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was fixing everything alone. The sound of hammering had become part of Nora's mornings. At first, it startled her, another reminder of what was broken. Now, it meant progress. Every day for the past week, Ethan had shown up before sunrise. He never knocked, just started working quiet, steady, dependable as dawn itself. Sometimes he brought coffee. Sometimes he didn't. He never stayed for lunch, never lingered longer than necessary, and yet, somehow, his presence filled the space like sunlight through an open window. That Tuesday, Nora found him replacing a rotted beam under the porch. "You're early," she said, leaning against the post. He didn't look up. "Old houses don't fix themselves." She smirked. "I've noticed." Ethan glanced up then, his eyes soft despite the exhaustion behind them. "You ever think this place might be testing you? Every single day?" He smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's worth it." She raised an eyebrow. "You talk like someone who's lost an argument with a house before. Once or twice." He hammered a nail, the rhythm steady. "Didn't end well." Jamie came out holding 2 sandwiches wrapped in paper towels. "Mr. Ethan," he called. "Mum made lunch." Ethan stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You didn't have to," Nora interrupted. "You say that every day, and you ignore it every day. Guess we're even." Jamie grinned, handing Ethan a sandwich. "It's peanut butter. The good kind, not the sad kind." Ethan laughed quietly. "The good kind, huh? I'm honored." They sat on the porch steps, 3 people and 1 very crooked house. For a while, they just ate in silence, listening to birds and wind and nails settling into wood. After lunch, Nora helped him carry supplies to the backyard. He worked while she painted the window frames. Their movements almost synchronized. At one point, she said, "You're not just a handyman, are you?" He froze for a second. "What makes you think that?" "You know too much. About load-bearing walls, materials, structure." She looked at him curiously. "You've done this before." He hesitated, gaze drifting toward the forest. "Used to design houses," he said quietly. "Long time ago." She tilted her head. "What happened?" He tightened a screw. "I stopped." "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because sometimes you build something perfect, and it still falls apart." Nora didn't push further, but she felt the weight in his words settle somewhere deep inside her as the sun started to dip. The house began to look less like a ruin and more like a home. The roof still needed work. The porch still crooked, but for the first time. It stood proud against the evening light. Ethan packed his tools. "You've got a strong foundation," he said. Nora smiled faintly. "I've been told that before." He looked at her, then not the house, not the walls, her. "You're tougher than this place." She tried to laugh, but it came out soft, almost shy. "I've had practice." He nodded. "Yeah, I can tell." Jamie came running out again, barefoot, waving a drawing. "Look, it's our house." This time the roof was whole, the sky clear, 3 figures smiling in front of it. Ethan took the paper carefully, as if it were glass. "You've got talent, kid." Jamie grinned. "I want to be like you when I grow up." Ethan's hand froze for a second, his smile faltering just slightly. Then he ruffled Jamie's hair. "Then you'll have to learn how to fix everything that breaks." Jamie nodded, completely serious. "Okay." Later, when Ethan left, Nora stood on the porch, watching him disappear down the road again. For the first time, she realized she wasn't watching him go. She was waiting for him to come back, and somewhere inside her chest, beneath the exhaustion and fear, something small but certain began to rebuild itself. The quiet, stubborn belief that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a house being fixed. Maybe it was her asterisk by Thursday. The air smelled like sawdust and second chances. Nora had gotten used to the rhythm of Ethan's hammer, the low hum of his old truck, and the way his shadow always stretched across her porch before noon. Jamie called him the fixer guy. The neighbors called him the quiet one. Nora, secretly, was beginning to call him Hope with with a hammer. That afternoon, Ethan was up on the roof again, replacing shingles while Nora painted the window frames below. She looked up. "You sure you don't need a hand?" He grinned down at her. "You afraid I'll fall?" "Just afraid I'll have to explain it to the insurance company. Then I'll make sure not to bleed on the paperwork." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're impossible." He winked. "That's fair." 10 minutes later, there was a thud, a sharp curse, and the sound of tools scattering. "Ethan." "I'm fine," came the reply. "Just dam-slipped on a loose shingle." She dropped her brush and ran around to the side of the house. He was sitting on the porch roof, one knee scraped, one hand holding his wrist. "Fine, huh?" she said, crossing her arms. He gave her a sheepish look. "Technically, still conscious. Technically bleeding." She sighed, grabbed the first aid kit from the porch, and climbed up halfway on the ladder. "Let me see, I've had worse. Humor me." He hesitated, then extended his arm. She cleaned the cut, careful, her fingers brushing against his skin, rough, warm, human. He watched her, expression unreadable. "You always this stubborn? Occupational hazard? Single mum? That explains the boss voice." She smirked. "You don't listen anyway." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I like being told what to do." The words hung there light, teasing, but under it, something deeper. When she finished, she said quietly, "You could have gotten hurt worse. I've been hurt worse." "Yeah. Doing what?" He paused, eyes drifting toward the forest again, voice low, "Building something that didn't last." Nora studied him for a moment. "You mean a house?" He shook his head. "A life." There it was, the first crack in his armor. She didn't push, just said softly, "You're still building. Not the same way." "Maybe better," she said. "Sometimes things fall apart so they can be put back together, right?" He looked at her then. Really looked, as if her words were something he hadn't known he needed until that moment. "Do you always fix things with words?" he asked. "Only when hammers don't work." He laughed quietly. That kind of laugh that sounds like it forgot how for a while. As the sun dropped low, they sat side by side on the porch roof, legs dangling, silence easy between them. Below them, Jamie played in the yard, chasing the dog through the puddles left from last week's storm. "Kid's got energy," Ethan said. "Gets it from his dad," Nora replied automatically, then stopped. A shadow crossed her face. Ethan waited, not prying. "He left," she said finally. "Said he couldn't handle this. The bills, the noise, me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "His loss." She gave a faint smile. "That's what my mum said." Except she used more creative language. That made him laugh again. When the lights started to fade, Nora climbed down first, turning to hold the ladder steady. "Be careful," she said. He looked down at her, hair catching the evening glow. Eyes steady, despite everything she'd been through, and said quietly, "You know, for someone who claims she doesn't need saving, you're awfully good at saving other people." She blinked. "You call fixing a scraped knee saving. I call it more than most people do." For a moment, neither moved. The air felt heavy with something unspoken. Not romance yet. Not quite, but something real. Then Jamie shouted from the yard, "Mum." "Mr. Ethan. Look, I found a frog." They both laughed, tension breaking, and Ethan climbed down the rest of the way. Later, after dinner, Nora stood at the sink washing dishes. Through the window, she saw Ethan drive away, his taillights glowing faintly through the mist, and for a second she caught herself thinking, "Don't go too far." She didn't say it out loud, but somehow she knew he'd heard it anyway. The rain came back a week later, softer this time, but for Ethan, every drop still sounded like sirens. He'd been quiet all morning, even quieter than usual. Nora noticed it as soon as he stepped onto the porch. Same steady rhythm, same polite nod, but his eyes weren't here. "Coffee?" she asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Maybe later." She frowned. "You okay?" "Yeah," he lied. "Just tired." But his hands were trembling slightly when he picked up the hammer dot around noon. Nora came outside with 2 mugs anyway. Ethan was sitting on the porch steps, staring at nothing. The tools lay forgotten beside him. She set the coffee down next to him. "Looks like the roof can survive without you for 10 minutes, she said softly. He gave a small, humorless laugh. "You'd be surprised." She sat beside him, pulling her knees up. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was rain on the tarp and the distant hum of Jamie's laughter inside. Then she said, "You ever going to tell me what's really behind those eyes of yours?" He looked at her long enough for her to almost regret asking. Then, quietly, "You really want to know?" "Yes." He took a deep breath, shoulders stiff. "I used to design houses," he began. "Big ones. Fancy ones. People trusted me with their dreams." Nora stayed silent. "There was this project, a coastal home in California. Modern, glass, everything. I was obsessed with making it perfect." He swallowed hard. "My wife wanted to move in early. I told her it was safe." His voice broke slightly. "It wasn't." Nora felt her heart drop. "There was a wiring fault I missed." A week later, a fire started in the kitchen. She was home with our son. He closed his eyes. They didn't make it out. The rain filled the silence that followed. It sounded like grief, soft, relentless. When he finally looked up, his eyes were raw, haunted. "I built a house that killed the only people I ever loved. That's who I am." Nora's throat tightened. "Ethan." He shook his head. "Don't. You don't need to say anything. I don't want forgiveness. I don't deserve it." She let the quiet stretch, then said gently, "Maybe it's not about deserving. Maybe it's about surviving." He laughed bitterly. "You sound like a therapist. Single mum, remember? Comes with the job." That made him smile, barely. "You really think people like me get to start over?" "I think people like you have to put for a long time." He didn't move. Then, softly, "When I saw your roof collapse that night, I froze. Not because I was scared, but because it looked exactly like the moment my world ended. I didn't move fast enough back then. I wasn't going to let that happen again." Nora's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother hiding. "Ethan," she said quietly, "you didn't just fix a roof that night. You fixed a moment." He looked at her, confusion flickering through the grief. "You gave me back something I forgot I had," she continued. "The feeling that someone would show up." He swallowed hard. "And what did I get?" "Another chance," she said simply. Jamie appeared at the doorway, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. "Mum, Mr. Ethan. You guys look sad." Ethan smiled faintly. "We're just remembering, buddy." Jamie tilted his head. "Is remembering bad?" Nora exchanged a glance with Ethan, then said softly, No, honey. Sometimes it's how we heal. Jamie nodded like he understood, handed Ethan one of the mugs, and ran back inside. Ethan stared at the steaming cocoa in his hands. Cheap instant mix, half marshmallows, and for the first time in years, he let himself drink something warm without guilt. As the rain eased, Nora reached out, resting her hand over his. He didn't flinch. "I can't change what happened," she said, "but I can remind you that you're still here, and that counts for something." He exhaled shakily. "You really think I can fix more than houses?" She smiled through her tears. "You're already doing it." That night, long after he left, Nora sat by the window, watching the reflection of her porch light flicker. On the wet ground, she thought about the man who carried ghosts in his eyes but still showed up every morning to build something that might outlast him, and she whispered to herself, maybe that's what real strength looks like, not building walls, but staying when it hurts. Ethan didn't come by for 2 days. Nora told herself she didn't care, that people came and went, that she was used to doing everything alone, but every time she heard a truck pass on the road, her heart lifted and then fell again when it didn't stop. By the third morning, the silence felt heavier than the rain ever had. When he finally showed up, it wasn't with his toolbox. He stood on her porch like a man who wasn't sure he belonged anywhere, didn't mean to disappear. He said quietly, "I noticed," Nora replied, crossing her arms but failing to sound angry. He looked exhausted, eyes shadowed, jaw tight, same clothes as 2 days ago. "Didn't sleep much," he admitted. "Didn't want to bring that here." "You can bring the mess," she said softly. "Just don't bring the silence." He met her eyes, a flicker of surprise, then something like gratitude. "Can I come in?" "You're already halfway there." Inside, Jamie was at school. The house smelled faintly of paint and coffee. Ethan stood near the window, hands buried in his pockets, watching the rain. "I shouldn't have told you all that," he said finally. "About the fire you needed to." He shook his head. "It doesn't make it better. It just makes me remember." Nora stepped closer. "Maybe remembering's the only way through." He gave a short laugh, tired, hollow. "You sound like someone who's had to claw her way back to." She didn't deny it. "Divorce'll do that." He looked at her, curiosity replacing the darkness for a moment. "He hurt you." She hesitated. "Not in the way you think." He didn't hit, didn't yell. He just left before he ever walked out. "You know, that kind of empty." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know that kind." The air between them thickened, not heavy, just real. He sat down at the table, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "When I dream," he said, "I still hear them. My wife calling for help. My son's voice. I wake up choking on smoke that isn't there." Nora knelt in front of him, her voice steady but trembling. "You survived something no one should. But surviving isn't the same as living." He swallowed hard. "I don't know how to do the second one." "You're doing it right now." He shook his head. "By fixing your house, by showing up." That broke something in him. Not loudly, but completely. He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking. And Nora did the only thing that felt right. She reached up and placed her hand over his. At first he froze. Then, slowly, he let her pull his hands away. When he looked at her, his eyes were wet, raw, and unguarded. He looked like someone who hadn't been touched with kindness in a very long time. She whispered, You don't have to carry all of it alone. I don't know how to let it go. Then let someone help you hold it. Her voice cracked on the last word, because she wasn't just talking about him anymore. For a long moment, they didn't move. The rain hit the windows in a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat neither of them could control. Then Ethan leaned forward, not to kiss her. Not yet, but to rest his forehead against hers. A quiet, desperate gesture. His voice barely audible. "I'm scared, Nora." "I know," she whispered. "So am I." And that was it, the truth between them, fragile and whole at once. When he finally pulled back, she smiled faintly. "You know," she said, "for a guy who builds houses, you're not great at walls." He laughed softly, the first real laugh in days. "Guess you're the one breaking them." She shrugged. "Occupational hazard?" Before he left, he turned at the door. "Thank you," he said. "For what? For not looking at me like I'm broken." She met his gaze. "You're not. You're just rebuilding." He smiled small, unsure, but real. "I'll see you tomorrow. You'd better." That night, Nora sat by the window, watching the porch light spill across the driveway. It wasn't until then that she realized she'd left it on for him. By mid-autumn, the house finally looked like it could breathe again. The porch was level. The roof no longer leaked. The paint gleamed pale blue in the sunlight. Nora called it miracle blue. Ethan said it looked like forgiveness. She laughed at that, but maybe he was right. Jamie adored him. Every evening, Ethan would teach him how to sand wood, measure planks, or hammer without hitting his thumb, which Jamie failed spectacularly at. "You'll get it," Ethan would say, grinning. "The trick's not to fight the nail, guide it. Like how Mom says with life," Jamie asked once. "Exactly," Ethan replied. Meeting Nora's amused glance over the porch rail, for a while, it felt like a real family. Messy, loud, alive. One Sunday afternoon, they had lunch outside, sandwiches, lemonade, laughter. Ethan leaned back, stretching, sunlight catching in his hair. "You know," he said, "this place doesn't look like it used to." Nora smiled. "Neither do you." He looked at her, eyes glinting. "That a compliment or concern? Depends how you take it. I'll take it as a compliment." "You always do." For a heartbeat, their eyes lingered, that quiet, unmistakable current neither had dared name yet. Then Jamie spilled his drink, and the spell broke, leaving both of them pretending it hadn't happened. Later that week, Nora went into town to buy more paint. When she walked into the hardware store, the clerk, an older man named Gary, who liked to know everything about everyone, smiled too wide, morning. "Nora, heard you've got yourself some help these days." She nodded. "Yeah, Ethan Cole. He's been incredible." Gary's smile faltered. "Ethan Cole, huh?" She frowned. "You know him?" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "Heard a story. Couple years back, architect from California, lost his family in a house fire. Something about faulty wiring." Nora froze. "You're saying that was him?" Gary shrugged. "Name matches. Looks like him, too. Papers said he vanished after the lawsuits. Whole thing was ugly." Her stomach dropped. She mumbled a quick thanks, bought the paint, and left the world suddenly feeling smaller and sharper. Back home, Ethan was sanding the porch railing. He looked up when she parked, smiling, the same easy, quiet smile that had become her morning comfort. But this time, she couldn't quite smile back. He noticed Everything okay? Yeah, she said too quickly. Just tired. He nodded, but his eyes narrowed slightly. You sure? Positive. She walked inside, leaving him standing there, the sound of the sander fading behind her. That night, she couldn't sleep. The rain started again, tapping on the roof he'd rebuilt, the same roof that had fallen in on her months ago. She thought about the story Gary told, about the fire, about how Ethan had looked when he talked about loss. She realized he'd never said the names of the people he'd lost, never mentioned where it happened, never said the words wife or child, just they, and suddenly she wasn't sure if that was distance or guilt. The next morning she tried to act normal. Jamie joked through breakfast. Ethan arrived early as usual, but he felt it immediately. The change in her tone, her distance. Something's off, he said quietly. When Jamie ran outside, she forced a smile. You're imagining things. He studied her face. No, you're pulling away. She looked at him then, heart pounding. Someone in town told me about the fire. He froze, the color draining from his face. I wanted to hear it from you, she continued. Not from gossip. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he said, so now you know. I already knew. You told me, Ethan. I just didn't know they knew. He exhaled, jaw tight. People always know, eventually. Then why stay here? Because I thought maybe here I could be someone else. Someone else, or someone better. He looked at her, eyes dark. What's the difference? Jamie's laughter echoed from the yard, soft and innocent, completely unaware of the quiet fracture forming inside the house. And for the first time in months, Nora didn't know how to answer the question that hung between them. Whether the man fixing her house was really rebuilding his life, or just hiding inside hers. The silence lasted 3 days. 3 days of Ethan working quietly, finishing projects without a word. 3 days of Nora pretending she didn't notice him arriving earlier and leaving faster. 3 days of Jamie asking, Mum, is Mr. Ethan mad at us? No, honey, she'd answer. Just busy. But even she didn't believe that. On the 4th day, the world decided to test them both. It happened just after noon. Nora was painting the window frame while Jamie played near the back fence. Then came the sound, a thud, followed by a sharp cry, Mum. Her heart stopped. She dropped the brush and ran. Jamie had slipped off the low fence, landing on his arm at an odd angle. Tears streamed down his face. Oh my God, Jamie. Before she could even move, Ethan was there, sprinting from the front yard like instinct, kneeling beside them. Let me see, he said, calm but urgent. Jamie whimpered. It hurts. Ethan's voice softened. I know, buddy. I got you. Just breathe. He checked the arm gently, his expression tightening. Might be a small fracture. We should go. At the hospital, time moved strangely. Nora sat in the waiting room, fingers twisting the hem of her jacket. Ethan paced nearby, restless, guilt flickering in his eyes. This isn't your fault, she said finally. I was supposed to fix that railing. It could have happened to anyone. He stopped pacing, looked at her. That's what people said after the fire. Nora's breath caught. Ethan, I should have double-checked the circuits. Should have waited 1 more week before they moved in. I keep making the same mistake. Nora, thinking I can fix things before they fall apart. She shook her head. That's not what happened here. He stared at the floor. Then why does it feel the same? When the doctor came out, relief flooded her. Just a minor fracture. Nothing serious. Jamie grinned through the cast, showing it off like a trophy. Mr. Ethan, look. They said I'm brave. Ethan knelt beside him, smiling weakly. You are. Can you sign it? Jamie asked. Ethan hesitated, then took the marker, writing carefully across the white cast. Every scar means we healed. Jamie read it out loud, beaming. Cool. Nora watched, throat tight. That night, after Jamie fell asleep, Ethan lingered on the porch. You don't have to stay, she said quietly. I know, but you're going to anyway. Yeah. They stood there, silence humming between them, not cold anymore, just fragile. Finally, she said, I shouldn't have doubted you. He exhaled. You had every right to. I didn't. Yeah, you did, he said gently. People see fire, they don't look at what caused it. They just see what's left. And what's left now? She asked softly. He looked at her eyes, tired but open. You tell me. She stepped closer, close enough to smell the faint scent of sawdust and rain on his shirt. I think what's left is someone who still shows up, she said. Even when it hurts. He swallowed hard. You make it sound simple. It's not. But it's real. Their eyes met. The kind of gaze that feels like a conversation in itself. Ethan, she whispered, you don't have to keep proving you're not the man from that fire. He frowned slightly. Then who am I? She smiled faintly. The one who helped me keep mine from falling apart. He didn't move for a long time. Then, slowly, he reached out and brushed his thumb against her cheek, a hesitant, trembling touch. It wasn't a kiss, but it was everything that came before one. The truth, the forgiveness, the beginning. Nora closed her eyes, leaning into his hand for just a second before whispering, tomorrow. He nodded. Tomorrow. And when he walked away that night, it wasn't distant she felt. It was the quiet promise of return. Winter came slow that year. The Oregon air had that crisp edge that made every breath feel new. Nora loved mornings now. She'd wake to the sound of hammering or laughter, sometimes both. Ethan had rebuilt half the porch by then. Jamie had claimed the other half as his personal fort. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. The house felt alive again. Ethan stayed later these days. Sometimes they had dinner together. Sometimes he just read while Nora graded papers at the table. Jamie would fall asleep on the couch, and Ethan would carry him to bed like it was the most natural thing in the world. Every moment felt borrowed, but also like it belonged, a strange kind of peace they were both learning how to hold. One evening, after Jamie was asleep, Nora found Ethan outside, sitting on the porch steps with a mug of coffee. You know, she said, stepping beside him, most people stop fixing things once they're done. He smiled faintly. Guess I like making sure they stay that way. Control issues. He chuckled. Maybe, or maybe it's because I never got to finish the last one. Her voice softened. The house. He nodded. The one in California. I was halfway through installing the safety system when he trailed off. She sat down next to him. You don't have to finish that sentence. I do, he said quietly. Because that's how healing works, right? You stop running. Nora looked at him, her heart full and fragile all at once. You've already stopped. Then why do I still feel like the fire's right behind me? She reached over, lacing her fingers through his. The first time she'd done it intentionally. Because sometimes healing feels like standing still while the world moves on. But it's not fire anymore, Ethan. It's just memory. He stared at their joined hands, then at her. You really believe that? I do, he smiled, slow and real. Then maybe I can too. The next morning, life felt simple again. They fixed the kitchen cabinets together, arguing playfully about colors. Jamie painted a crooked heart on one of the boards. For good luck, he said proudly. Ethan ruffled his hair. That's better than any blueprint I've ever made. Blueprint? Jamie asked. Ethan smiled. It's what you draw before you build something. Then draw one for us. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, he said quietly. I think I can do that. That night, when Nora came into the kitchen, she saw it pinned on the fridge. A rough sketch in pencil. Their house, complete with porch, trees, and 3 stick figures holding hands. Above it, Ethan had written, "Blueprint for home." Her chest tightened, for the first time. She realized she wasn't waiting for him to leave anymore. She was waiting for him to stay. But peace, she'd learned, rarely lasted unchallenged the next day. While Ethan was out running errands, a black SUV pulled up to the end of the driveway. A man stepped out, sharp suit, camera bag slung over his shoulder. He looked around the property, then called out, "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm looking for Ethan Cole." Nora froze. "Who are you?" "David Rowe, Oregon Chronicle. I'm doing a piece on architectural ethics and the 2019 Monterey fire." Her blood went cold. He smiled politely. "I heard he's been living out here. Thought maybe you'd know where to find him." She said nothing. The man continued, "People deserve to know the truth, Ms." She forced her voice steady. "Blake, and no, I don't know what you're talking about." He studied her for a beat, then gave a thin smile. "If you do see him, tell him hiding doesn't make a man innocent." When the SUV drove away, her knees nearly gave out. Ethan came home at dusk. He noticed her expression immediately. "What happened?" "Someone was here," she said quietly. "A reporter. He asked for you." His face went pale. "What did you tell him?" "That I didn't know anything." He nodded slowly. "Thank you, Ethan. Are they going to print something?" He rubbed a hand across his jaw. "Probably. They always do." "Then what happens now?" He looked at her, eyes full of the kind of tired that went deeper than sleep. "I stop hiding." "Ethan, no," he said gently. "You were right. Healing isn't running. Maybe it's time I stand still." That night, Nora couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, watching him out on the porch, sketchbook open on his lap, staring at the house like he was memorizing it. He didn't look afraid, just ready, and somehow she knew the man who once lost everything was about to risk losing it again, not because he wanted to, but because love, real love, demanded truth. Asterisk, the next morning, the town felt smaller. Whispers had a way of traveling faster than wind. By noon, people in the cafe were talking about the reporter from the Oregon Chronicle. By evening, someone had already pulled up the old articles, the fire, the lawsuits, the word manslaughter that never quite went away. Nora felt the shift instantly. The clerk who used to greet her smiled less. Jamie's teacher asked, "Is it true you have someone staying with you?" And every time she heard herself say, "He's not who you think he is." But deep down, she knew the truth had to come out. Not from rumors, From him, that night, Ethan sat in the half-finished living room, staring at the blueprint he'd drawn. He looked calm to calm. "You're going to talk to them, aren't you?" Nora asked. He nodded. "If I don't, they'll keep coming here. To you. To Jamie. You don't owe them anything. I owe myself the chance to stop hiding." She walked closer. "You'll get hurt again." He smiled faintly. "You don't rebuild without getting splinters." Her throat tightened. "You don't have to do it alone." He looked up at her. "I was hoping you'd say that." The next day, they drove into town together. Reporters waited near the diner. Not a mob, just 2 or 3, but enough to make heads turn. Ethan stepped out first. Nora stayed close, one hand lightly brushing his arm. Cameras clicked. Someone asked, "Ethan, is it true you falsified the safety report in Monterey?" He took a breath. "No," he said simply. "But I made mistakes that cost lives. I missed a fault. I didn't double-check. I thought perfection meant speed." "I was wrong," another reporter. "And you vanished after the case." "I walked away because grief made me a coward. But hiding doesn't heal you. Facing it does." Nora watched, heart in her throat, as the man who once couldn't say his family's names spoke them out loud for the first time. "My wife, Lauren, and my son, Peter, they were my whole world. I couldn't save them, but I can live the kind of life they'd be proud of. I can build something that lasts." The reporters fell silent. One finally asked, "And what is that, Mr. Cole? What are you building now?" Ethan looked at Nora, really looked then, at the house key she'd tucked in his coat pocket that morning. "Home," he said simply. "For people who need one, including myself." Then he turned and walked away. No dramatics. No running. Just a man who'd said enough. Back at the house, the silence was heavy. But it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. Jamie was waiting on the porch, holding a small piece of wood in his hands. "Mr. Ethan," he said, "I made something for you." He handed over a wooden plaque, uneven, clumsy, but carved with all his heart. It read, "Welcome home." Ethan stared at it, eyes glistening. "You made this?" Jamie nodded proudly. "So you don't forget where you belong." Ethan knelt, pulling him into a hug. "I won't." When he looked up, Nora was standing by the door, tears in her eyes, smiling through them. Later, as the sun set behind the mountains, Ethan and Nora stood on the porch together. "You did it," she said softly. He shook his head. "We did. You're not scared." "Still am," he admitted. "But maybe fear's just proof you're trying." She smiled. "Then you're doing great." He laughed quietly. "You, too." Inside, the blueprint still hung on the fridge. Only now, Jamie's wooden sign sat right beside it. One drawn, one carved. One planned, one felt. Both said the same thing: home. A year later, the house stood exactly as Ethan had drawn it. Blue paint shimmering under sunlight. Porch straight and wide. Windows open to the ocean breeze. If you drove past, you'd never know it used to be a ruin. You'd just see laughter spilling from the kitchen, the smell of pancakes, the sound of a boy running barefoot through the grass. But Nora knew. Ethan knew. Every nail, every beam, every coat of paint carried a story, not of perfection, but of rebuilding. Jamie was 7 now. His arm had healed, though he still liked to show people his faint scar like a badge of honor. See this? He'd tell visitors. That's when we fixed everything. Ethan would smile every time, ruffle his hair, and quietly say, "Yeah, we did." It was late afternoon when Nora stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand. Ethan was repairing the old swing again, not because it needed fixing, but because that's just who he was. "You know," she teased, "if you keep finding things to fix, you'll never rest." He looked up, grinning. "That's the point. Resting's overrated. Tell that to your back." He laughed, leaning back against the railing. "Fair enough." Then, softer, "Can you believe it's been a year?" Nora glanced toward the horizon where the sun dipped low, painting the house gold. "Some days it feels like yesterday," she said. "Some days it feels like a lifetime. Which one's today?" She smiled. "Somewhere in between." They walked together through the garden, the one Jamie insisted on planting with wildflowers, because houses need color. The smell of earth and lavender filled the air. Ethan bent down, pulling a stray weed. "Jamie's gonna have a field day when he sees you ruining his garden," she said. "He'll forgive me, because you're the one who built the fort." Ethan smirked. "Exactly," Nora laughed, shaking her head. "You two are trouble. Maybe, but the good kind." Inside, the walls were filled with small moments, pictures, drawings, fingerprints in the paint. A framed photo on the mantel showed the three of them on the porch, smiling, the words "Welcome Home" carved in wood just behind them. That plaque never moved. Neither did the blueprint on the fridge. Two reminders of everything they lost, and everything they chose to rebuild. Later that evening, as the stars began to appear, Nora sat on the steps beside Ethan. Jamie was asleep. The house quiet except for the crickets and the wind. "It's strange," she said. "I used to hate this house." Ethan smiled. "Because it reminded you of what was gone." She nodded. "Now it reminds me of what stayed." He glanced at her. "You mean me?" She met his eyes, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You, him, this, us. Everything that grew from what broke." Ethan's voice was quiet. "I never thought I'd deserve something like this again." "You didn't have to," she said. "You just had to keep showing up." He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "I love you, Nora," he said simply. "You and Jamie, you're my home." She blinked back tears, squeezing his hand. "Took you long enough to say it." He laughed, leaning closer, the porch light catching the faint scars on his fingers, reminders of all he'd fixed, including himself. Nora kissed him softly, the kind of kiss that wasn't about passion or apology, but peace. When they pulled back, the world felt still, just the hum of night, the creak of the swing, the quiet heartbeat of a house finally whole inside on the fridge. Jamie had taped a new drawing that morning, 3 figures standing under a big sun, holding hands. The house behind them shining bright blue. He'd written in messy letters across the top, "Our home forever." Ethan saw it the next morning and smiled. No guilt, no ghosts, no fire, just home.